Dynamical Medicine. Dynamical systems theory refers to the branch of science concerned with chaos. The word chaos is derived from Greek mythology. The goddess Gaia pulled the earth out of the chaos of disorder and uncertainty. Since the time of Sir Isaac Newton, science associated chaos only with randomness and unpredictability. The entire scientific method was designed to ignore and exclude the unpredictable, although chaotic processes are much more common in nature than predictable processes. Idealized, reductionistic, deterministic models worked only if a special circumstance was created in the experiment to eliminate all the variables of the real world. Consequently, these experiments often yielded data that did not offer practical applications. A more realistic methodology for understanding the complexities of the chaotic world we live in was needed. Dynamical systems theory provides this model. Using a whole new set of terms like fractals, nonlinear, catastrophic bifurcation, strange attractors, point attractors, algorithms, and degeneracy, this new way of understanding old mysteries has set the scientific world on its ear. Nowhere is dynamical systems theory offering more exciting ways of understanding questions that have puzzled the greatest scientific minds throughout time than in the biological sciences. Dynamical medicine is the medicine of the future. The breakdown of Newtonian reasoning. Newtonian scientific methods sought the answer, as though a single value would always fit a problem. Difficulties arose when scientists studying natural systems found that while there were averages that could be obtained by statistical analysis, few dynamic natural systems behaved predictably. Dynamics of dynamics, changing changes, seem beyond mathematical understanding. While predictions of average behavior were possible, predictions of the behavior of a system at any given moment were elusive. Quantum mechanics theory stated that beyond a certain limit, uncertainty of outcome reigned because it was impossible to know exactly the initial conditions of a system. This created perplexity for scientists studying natural phenomena because no one could know with certainty all the variables operating on a system all at once. Edward Lorenz, a mathematician studying weather with computer models, discovered this dilemma when using simple convection modeling of weather systems. If he tried to start a computer model of the weather without exactly the same values each time, the differing algorithms generated began to vary greatly after only a few calculations. He discovered this when he started a program using figures correct to 4 decimals, when he derived the starting points from a program running at 6 decimal accuracy. Within a few cycles of the calculations, the computer models differed so significantly that the same algorithm yielded vastly different weather predictions. He realized that even minute differences between the initial conditions of the 2 calculations meant that computer modeling of the processes would be impossible beyond a few cycles of the system. He came to call this the butterfly effect, as theoretically a butterfly's fluttering wings could drastically alter a weather pattern over time when viewed from this perspective. Increased complexity yielded increased uncertainty. Spurred by his frustration, Lorenz scoured the mathematical literature and found a way of modeling his data based on the work of Henri Poincaré. Poincaré used descriptive mathematical methods instead of predictive methods to analyze complex systems in the 1890s. Initial condition uncertainty made accurate mathematical predictions sensitive to differences and is the root of understanding chaos mathematically. When Lorenz used Poincaré's methods to analyze his data, a startling pattern emerged. He found that, while his data did fluctuate, there was a range of values about which the values seemed to hover. He called this domain of values an attractor. When the mathematical patterns were simple, these attractor functions remained linear and highly predictable. As the patterns grew more complex, a simple but profound way of understanding the uncertainty of the system appeared on his computer screen. Lorenz found that even if he could not predict exactly what the value of a system would be at a given instant, its range could be predicted to lie within a certain domain of values, its attractor. Attractors. Edward Lorenz's attempts to model weather systems using a simple convection model had opened the door to a new way of understanding natural systems' unpredictability. An attractor was a value about which a dynamic system varied but never stayed fixed. A simple example of an attractor for medicine would be the normal temperature. Your body may hover about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but if you actually plotted your temperature using dynamical systems analysis, you would find that it describes an attractor function and not a fixed value, as body temperature rises and falls normally during the day with variations of activity and circumstances. Complex attractor functions are the rule and not the exception in biological systems. All biological systems are dynamically dynamic or dynamical systems. Attractor function domains can be used to describe and predict patterns of motion, change, and configuration in biological organisms. Biological systems interact as complex attractor functions that create interwoven changing patterns. As flows of molecules and energy, biological systems propagate as complicated waveforms that maintain certain constraints or limits of distance and ranges of energy. Modeling these processes mathematically involves both the individual components and the entire system simultaneously. To understand these relationships, nonlinear shifts within the system are modeled not with just numbers, but with geometry. Since biological processes involve flows, the key to comprehending these aspects of attractor functions involves the shapes of the changes, not just their values. Patterns of flow become more important than the values of individual aspects of the system at a given moment. Describing the system's behavior allows a way to learn more about order present within its unpredictability. Fractals. Another cornerstone concept of dynamical medicine is the fractal. Fractals describe mathematical processes that iterate or repeat patterns. The domain of a system changes only slightly when its base algorithm generates its interactions. But when the system shifts non-linearly, the effect is repetition of a pattern when viewed geometrically. Examining first simple fractals allows us to see how these interactions work. If a simple pattern, like a triangle, is repeated at different scales, the principle of iteration becomes more understandable. Each iteration creates a form of increasing complexity and higher dimensionality. Each time the pattern repeats, it differentiates further. simple patterns have a limited domain of changes available, so are more predictable and regular. They are also more constrained, with less freedom. The more complex the fractal, the richer its range of responses and the greater its freedom. A slightly more complicated example of fractals from biology is illustrated by the shapes of trees. The basic pattern of the tree is visible in the angles between the trunk and the limbs and the branches and the twigs and the leaves, and the veins of the leaf. At each iteration, the form of the plant structure changes slightly to reflect the interplay of forces at that scale. The angles at each dimensionality are similar, but beyond the dimensionalities, the leaves, the energy form will no longer propagate, so the tree ends in the leaves. The leaf represents the point at which the dimensionalities of the tree play out. Beyond that point, the molecules of the tree cannot constrain the energy in the system, so the phase space that is the tree terminates. A phase space is a term from topology that describes the volume of interaction of molecules. A phase space must be constrained and withstand a certain range of perturbations to exist. The phase space is a type of manifold or channel for energy when described mathematically. The phase space of the tree enfolds the energies flowing through the tree topologically. The fractal describes the nonlinear patterns of these energy flows. The pattern of the fractal describes its algorithm or waveform. For any biological phase space to exist, it must have both a range of interaction with energy, a modulus, and a unique wavelength, an algorithm. Fractals make understanding these seemingly complex concepts simple to grasp. Fractals are everywhere in biology and biological systems. Biological systems seem paradoxical when analyzed by Newtonian methods. Benoit Mandelbrot, in his landmark book, The Fractal Geometry of Nature, illustrates this in his discussion of the geometry of arteries and veins. Harvey led us to the view of the motion of blood in the body as circular. That is, that an artery and a vein are found within a small distance to nearly every point in the body, and blood flows from the heart to all the tissues and back again in a circulation. What an exquisite paradox! Not only must every point in the body have an artery and vein near it, but they must not take up the room needed for the tissue itself. Topologically, the blood flow is two-dimensional, linear through the circulation, but the vasculature must form a common boundary three-dimensionally with a space in the tissue parenchyma that is also three-dimensional and much larger than the space the blood vessels occupy. The virtue of the fractal approach is that it offers a way to explain this mathematically. In biological processes, complex patterns are often based on simple algorithms that interplay at multiple dimensionalities. From leaves to flowers to blood vessels to brain function, chaos math offers new ways of understanding these mysteries of the biological world. Fractal iteration, unlike simple iteration, describes changing patterns. Each shift of the pattern is described mathematically as a nonlinear, catastrophic bifurcation. This nonlinear change from pattern to pattern in the flow of biological molecules is based on a concept developed by the mathematician-physicist Ilya Prigogine. Prigogine developed his theory of dissipative structures, energy forms in nature, on the concept of catastrophic bifurcation. This concept is best illustrated by the example of an ocean wave. In a wave, a pattern emerges, crests, falls, and re-emerges in a pattern similar to the original wave, but slightly different. At the point where the wave structure will no longer support the pattern, it collapses in what Perugin describes as a catastrophic bifurcation. Mathematically, the transition is a nonlinear change. All the energy of the wave is present in the chaotic rolling water between the wave patterns, but the energy is no longer organized as it is in the wave. Nonlinear catastrophic bifurcations are common in biological fractals. They describe the point at which an algorithm will no longer propagate in the tissue of the organism and shifts to the next phase space pattern. At the point at which this fractal flow of energy ends, it enters its final catastrophic bifurcation and terminates. In simple biological systems, simple fractals can describe the domains of values available for iteration of their phase spaces. There is even a computer software program that allows the use of fractals to model simple biological forms. Modeling more complex systems will require a more complete understanding of complicated polydimensional systems than we currently have available. But it will probably eventually be possible to model humans and other complex biological creatures with such mathematics. The fractals involve complicated attractor domains that are theoretically possible. Modeling moving systems is a much greater challenge than static fractal models, but it is in the area of change that fractals offer the greatest promises in medicine. Already chaos math is being applied to cardiology, neurology, sleep disorders, and pharmacology. Though complicated, dynamical analysis is already yielding some interesting results. Dynamical medical modeling, cardiology. Hardly any major research facility in cardiology these days is without its resident expert on chaos math. Dynamical analysis of heart rhythms and arrhythmias provides new ways to study the heart. It has been known for decades that the interval between the ventricular contraction and the repolarization of the heart muscle was an important predictor of heart contractile behavior. Chaos math yields new insights into this phenomenon. As heart rhythm destabilizes, the intervals between contraction and repolarization become prolonged. The normal pacemaker of the heart, the sinoatrial node, becomes so delayed in its firing that other areas in the atria take over pacemaker function. When graphed with dynamical methods, the attractor function of the EKG intervals between contraction and repolarization, which normally resemble the owl-eyed Lorenz attractor, develops a wrinkle. The wrinkle reflects the prolonged recovery time of the heart from the reduced oxygen availability. Eventually, a second attractor forms in a vortex within the chaotic attractor. This corresponds with the development of an irritable focus in the atrium that sets off the premature beats that disrupt normal heart rhythms. As this second attractor disintegrates the waveform, a catastrophic bifurcation occurs in the wave pattern. This type of catastrophic bifurcation is the cause of the catastrophic arrhythmias of sudden cardiac death. The irritable focus of the atrium that takes over as the heart's pacemaker is literally a point attractor function that disintegrates the linearity of the normal strange attractor function of the system. This example illustrates two important points about dynamical systems theory and medicine. 1. Dynamical systems analysis can be used to model complex phenomena involving multiple variables in human physiology. 2. The point attractor seen in the mathematical model corresponds with a real point in the body where the catastrophic bifurcation emerges. Dynamical medical modeling, neurology. A similar phenomenon takes place in disorders of the central nervous system. Chaos mathematics has yielded interesting insights in several important areas of neurology. Intelligence research, sleep disorders, motor system control, electroencephalography, and seizures. Tremors in the neuromuscular system, whether from fatigue, cerebellar lesions, or Parkinson's disease, may seem to reflect increased randomness in the system. It is just the opposite. In a normal system, motor units fire in an actively desynchronized fashion. This desynchronization reflects the fully differentiated fractal of their firing pattern. Tremor is caused by synchronization, an oversimplification of firing patterns of motor units. Instead of the firings branching out to their normally robust, differentiated, chaotic fractal form, firings become simpler as their fractals bifurcate catastrophically too early. In normal active desynchronization, the flows of these fractal and phase spaces remain fully iterated and strange attractor dominant. As point attractors build up in the fractal, the dimensionality of the processes is reduced, and when the normal mechanisms of randomness break down and become more synchronized, the result is tremor. Tremor reflects oversimplification of the trees of neuron firings from loss of dimensionality in the tissue. Similar processes are at work in seizure disorders. At first glance at these two EEG tracings, one highly irregular and the other quite periodic, it would seem that the one with the regular, round wave followed by the sharp wave would be a healthier tracing than the chaotic, arrhythmic one. Actually, the wildly random one is a normal adult EEG, and the regular, predictable one is a spike wave complex of an epileptic seizure. The epileptic pattern, again, reflects simplification of the fractal and patterns involved in the neuronal processes. Point attractors locally alter bioelectrical behavior of the tissues and disturb dimensionality of the aggregate behavior. As dimensionality is lost, the patterns simplify and catastrophic wider shifts of physiology result. These in turn disturb physiology in other systems, like the heart and respiratory system, and disorder spreads. A point attractor in one system begins to limit dimensionality not only in the system where it occurs, but in systems it interacts with in other parts of the body. Dynamical medical modeling, endocrinology. Point attractor behaviors dominate glands in endocrine disturbances as manifested in hyper and hypo states. The gland function gets stuck at one extreme as point attractor limits strange attractor adaptability of the system. Almost all imbalances of the endocrine system are now being modeled with dynamical systems theory and lending new insights into the dynamics of the body in health and disease. The point attractor set. Criticality, triviality. Point attractors and periodic attractors both tend to limit the range of options of the system. Collectively, the term point attractor set is used to describe the entire aggregate of point attractors loading the system. Point attraction can affect thousands of dimensionalities or one-dimensionality. Point attraction in one system tends to limit freedoms of responses in other systems they interact with. As freedoms of responses that strange attractors normally offer the system are lost, the chances of catastrophic nonlinear shifts increases. The proper term for this increased probability of change is criticality. As point attractors load up the system, the criticality increases and greater instability to perturbation results. Point attractor is a key term in dynamical systems theory. Point attractors come in two broad categories: trivial and non-trivial. If a point attractor is trivial, this means its effects on the system are reversible. Like all point attractors, it still reduces the freedom of the system to adapt to changes, so its interaction with the system still increases the criticality of the system. Theoretically, it remains reversible, but the stress of its presence still increases the system's tendency to change and increases its chances of having a catastrophic response. If it is trivial, it remains by definition reversible, which means that its effects in the system are such that it can recover normal patterns of function once the point attractor's effects have left the system. Trivial point attractors increase the stress load, but do not guarantee permanent changes in the system. A non-trivial point attractor distorts the system permanently, forever warping the form. Non-trivial point attractors no longer allow the system to maintain a full range of strange attractor functions with maximal freedom of responses and maximal adaptability. The dimensionality of the system is actually lowered, with resulting loss of freedom to the entire system. Consider again the example of the EEG tracings. Normally, the EEG is highly chaotic, reflecting higher-order dimensionalities at work in the system with full strange attraction. At rest, with eyes closed, quiet surroundings, and no stimuli or mental effort, sensory inputs are reduced, creating an attractor complex that is simpler and of lower dimensionality than the waking state with eyes open and a mental task such as counting, as shown here. The dimensionality of the brain's aggregate attractor becomes more complex as the system interacts with more dimensionalities of energy. In the healthy state, this complexity of dimensional interplay is reflected in the highly chaotic EEG tracings. With development of a seizure locus, which becomes a point attractor complex for the system, lower dimensionality in the physical tissue causes a fractal bifurcation at lower dimensionalities, which is reflected in the simplification of brainwave patterns seen in seizures. The fractal bifurcation in the tree of events that compose the fully differentiated patterns which give the normally complex, chaotic EEG patterns break down and dimensionality is lowered, causing the simplified periodic wave spike complexes. The system is so loaded up with point attractors that cortical strange attractor function is lost altogether in a nonlinear shift from cortical to brainstem function results. With the loss of dimensionalities in one portion of the dynamical system of the body, other subsystems' dimensionalities are lowered as reflected in the heart and respiratory tracings of the patient having a seizure. All point attractors increase the chances of nonlinear shifts within systems. Simple fractals often bifurcate into catastrophic system-ending events because their range of available options for response is relatively limited. As the system ages, it loads up with point attractors which replace more adaptable strange attractor functions, and options for response in the system grow fewer and fewer. Energy trapped in the point attractor set of the organism increases its criticality, increasing the odds of destabilization and a cascade of responses, ending in the destruction of the entire system. A simplified way of understanding a point attractor is to imagine an Olympic athlete trying to run with one foot nailed to the floor. That nail is like a giant point attractor. If it can be removed, it is trivial. The runner can resume the race. If it can't be removed, it is non-trivial and remains in the system, and no matter how well the rest of the system is working, the race is over. Eventually, biological systems accumulate point attractors on multiple dimensionalities, and gradually these increase criticality until a point attractor destabilizes the system and dysfunction, decompensation, disease, and death ensue. These point attractors operating in the body occur in all systems, but there are multiple ways for the system to respond to their presence. These disturbances of function manifest in tissue in a condition called somatic dysfunction. Somatic dysfunction literally means body not working right. It is a term from osteopathy describing a state of tissue that precedes disease. Tissue changes as point attraction disrupts linearity of tissue flows. The molecular flow pattern becomes distorted and the tissue thickens or swells or shows some other sign of loss of linearity and altered phase relations as the point attractor impacts the system. At the microscopic level, loss of linearity means loss of molecular flow patterns and alterations of local phase density, ionic concentration, and chemical availability. As these spread, gradients of phase density are set up macroscopically and larger disturbances result. Local flows are interrupted or made nonlinear dimensionally. The slower moving fluids about the point attractor create a higher local fluid pressure and the tissue swells. This is the classic tumor of the Greeks. As the point attractor breaks the linearity of molecular flow, the accumulation of molecules causes release of inflammatory substrates that alter local vascular tone. The autonomics try to accelerate flow past the clog by dilating local vessels, increasing sympathetic tone, raising perfusion pressure, and washing noxious byproducts through the system. We describe this process as inflammation, with redness, rubor, heat, calor, and pain, dolor, as the system tries to reverse the point attractor. In somatic dysfunction diagnosis, we observe this in altered tissue texture, asymmetry, and limited motion. If a point attractor persists, nervous system modulation is eventually evoked as sensory and autonomic responses to the area are distorted by the point attractor effects. These changes are detectable in nervous system response patterns. Often these modulatory effects are reflected in the paraspinal muscles at the affected segment, a fundamental concept in osteopathic diagnosis and osteopathic treatment of pain and disease. The central nervous system is the chief integration system of the body. As the coordinator of responses intercellularly, the nervous system modulates responses to the point attractor load of the system. Most of the responses of the body are kept linear, flowing with the circularity of the integrated whole by the nervous system in reflexes and other lower-level processing phenomena. Conscious awareness of point attractors is not the norm. Most are processed by the body at subconscious or reflex levels. Point attractors come in two types, trivial and non-trivial. Both trivial and non-trivial point attractors increase criticality of the system. Everything is a stress on the human system. Take the example of eating two different compounds, sodium chloride and lead acetate. Both sodium chloride and lead acetate must pass through the molecular flux, the metabolism of the system of the organism, and fit its overall energy equation or algorithm. Both change the system by entering the equation, but one, salt, is a dependent variable, and the other, lead, is an independent variable. Salt is a normal component of metabolic flux, and lead is not. Salt fits into the system's base algorithm. Lead certainly does not. After the salt molecules pass through it, it reverts to its original homeostatic mechanism. Lead cannot be excreted and persists, but does not participate, is not part of, or one with the system. Salt effects are reversible. Lead produces irreversible change in the system. Salt fits into the energy equation and is a component of it and is one with it. It integrates or is integral. Lead does not fit the equation and disintegrates the system. Dependent variables fit and preserve the integrity of the system. Independent variables distort it. The salt-consuming human system will continue to evolve across time in a similar pattern and remain temporally open. The lead consumer will stop evolving and close temporally about the point attractor event, which was the introduction of the lead. One system continues, one ends. When a point attractor event is integral or trivial, it passes through without changing the basic pattern. When a point attractor is non-trivial, it becomes biological noise. This is residual irritation in the system from the stressor. If these stresses are integrated and eventually dissipated into the integral flows of the system, they remain trivial. This process is called numerical integration. It literally means one with time. It persists, and persistence is existence. If stressors enter and the system cannot channel their energy into integral flows, they become independent variables in the system. Examples of such non-trivial point attractors occurring in the body include deposition of atherosclerotic plaques in arteries, ovarian cyst formation, and fatty infiltration of the liver. Sometimes point attractors do not accumulate in a system, but cause a loss of topological integrity. Ulcers, where a fractal layer boundary is lost, reflect such point attractor effects as one example. Ulcers evoke a cascade of limitation of responses of systems that interact with the gastrointestinal system where the point attractor originates. First, the mucosa develops impaired protection from acid. Acid eats a hole in the layer, and inflammatory changes are evoked. If the acid erodes an artery, blood vessel integrity is lost, bleeding occurs, and the patient experiences heartburn and abdominal pain. He vomits blood, or the gut becomes irritated and propels the food through as quickly as possible, causing belly cramps and tarry stools. The freedom of the entire system to explore the world is reduced as the person with the point attractor becomes aware of its presence and curtails activity to modify behavior to cope with the threat to the system integrity. Point attractor load sets the stage for dysfunction, decompensation, and disease in the system. Identification of point attractors disturbing the system is sometimes simple and sometimes a complicated process. There are two key concepts in identifying somatic dysfunctions as point attractors at work. Number one, identification of the nature of the tissue's texture changes. Number two, identification of the behavior of the nervous system's responses to the disturbance. Identification of how tissue is affected requires knowledge of not only normal tissue, but the range of changes tissue undergoes with various stressors and diseases. The nervous system modulates most responses to stressors. Identification of the behavior of the nervous system requires complete understanding of the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and visceral responses under various stressors. Strategies in assisting the body's reversal of point attractors hinge upon knowledge of ways to evoke modulation specific for the point attractor evoking the constellation of responses. If strange attraction can be restored, the dimensionality of the tissue increases and point attractor load effects remain trivial. Triviality remains the goal of treatment. Dynamical medicine is the medicine of the future. More than that, it defines optimal health mathematically, linking medicine solidly to biophysics. Wave mechanics become tissue patterns. Nonlinear catastrophic bifurcations become somatic dysfunctions. Point attraction becomes pathology. Disintegration becomes disease. Homogeneity and non-triviality are death. Like Gaia pulling the earth out of chaos, osteopathy pulls medicine out of chaos theory and puts it into the wonderful simplicity of dynamical medicine. Unlike the ever more complex, over-specialized, reductionist model that has dominated Western medicine for centuries, dynamical medicine offers unifying concepts about biological systems that apply to all aspects of life. Dynamical medicine is truly the medicine of the future.